Hello everyone and welcome to a very short tutorial on the Queen's Gambit accepted. Now I'm doing this tutorial because a lot of you have been requesting it and I've been looking for something to try out myself against pawn to d4. So the reason you use this is so you don't have to learn all the other openings like the Ragozin defense or the Nimzovich defense or the Benoni defense or the King's Indian or any of the 1000 openings that exists on pawn to d4. If white plays pawn to d4 and pawn to d5 and c4, you can simply accept the Queen's Gambit, and then you have a lot less theory to learn. I mean, there's still quite a lot, it's just a lot less than if you would focus on going through all of the defenses and all of white's possible replies to not accepting the Queen's Gambit. And yeah, I mean, it's very useful in the sense that I don't think that the players with the white pieces know how to handle this very well, because everyone with white knows how to play against the Nimzo, knows how to play against the Ragozin, knows how to play against all of the usual replies that black will have. I just don't think as many people know how to handle Queen's Gambit accepted. So for this short tutorial, I'm going to show you 3 lines that are most popular in the Queen's Gambit accepted. That is, after we accept the pawn, d captures, and c4, we're going to show knight to f3, we're going to show pawn to e3, and we're going to show pawn to e4, as those are the top 3 replies. Then I'm going to show you, I think it's a blitz game that Magnus played online, where he played the Queen's Gambit accepted, as he chose a very, very interesting line. And then I'm going to show you a game from the Botvinnik Memorial Tournament where Kasparov crushed Vladimir Kramnik with black with a beautiful queen sacrifice in the Queen's Gambit accepted. So, okay. What do we cover first? The most popular move is knight to f3, so we're gonna tackle that last. Then it's pawn to e4, and then it's pawn to e3, pawn to e3, and then I think pawn to e4. I'm gonna check. I don't want to trick you guys. I'm gonna just really quickly check in which order we should cover them, because yeah, I think that would be proper. So okay, knight to f3, most popular, then e4, and then e3. E3, I think in the olden days was the most popular reply, so we're gonna start with that. So if your opponent plays e3, which is very, very natural, you have a doubled pawn on the c file, your opponent wants to capture on c4. One thing you don't want to do is fall for the oldest trick in the book, and that is to play pawn to b5. And it seems like, okay, you can play it, but then your opponent will play pawn to a4. You're gonna defend with c6, and after captures and captures, you're gonna be, I have a defended pawn here. You've just wandered a pawn for nothing, and then your opponent will play queen to f3, and you will resign the game because you have to give up the rook, or you have to, well, you have to give up the rook. There's nothing that you can do here. But it's not all that bad, because after d captures and the pawn to e3, you can play this. You just can't play pawn to b5. You have to play you can play pawn to b5. You have to play knight to f6, and then it's a very much a playable opening. And we're going to focus in every line, whether it's the knight to f3, whether it's the e3, whether it's the e4, on how to play c5 as quickly as possible. Also something that Kasparov did in his game against Kramnik. So let's see, bishop captures on c4, we have pawn to e6, knight to f3, white wants the castle. You're going to play c5 as soon as possible. I find that often when I'm discussing the sort of defenses against pawn to d4 openings, like when I did against the London system, I find that these pawn to c5 systems work best. I don't know why. So okay, castle's kingside. If white captures, you don't really have anything to worry about. We have pawn to a6. Now you can play b6, you can play b5, you can play pawn to c4 even in some lines. And now if d captures on c5, you're just going to play bishop captures on c5. And if queen captures on d8, you have nothing to worry about here. This is even a white's best reply, and it's even the top move recommended by the engine, but black is perfectly fine here. And for something like knight b to d2, you can play pretty much any move here, and your moves are very, very natural to play. You can play some weird moves like bishop to d7, but you can just play a natural move like rook to d8, and then after something like pawn to b3, preparing bishop to b2, you're going to play knight to c6, bishop to b2, for example, pawn to b6, you want to put a bishop on b6 as well, let's say pawn to a3, preparing b4, bishop to b7, and it's a completely equal position, both players with 2 pawns on the king side. Bishop pair for each. The rooks are coming to C and D file as same as white, so I mean it's an equal position, and you will I guess, enjoy playing it as such. If you encounter after d captures on c4 this pawn to e3 move. So that's one way to play it. Another way for white to play it is to play pawn to e4. And okay, now again, many ways to handle this, but I think e5 is the most interesting way to play this. And then after knight to f3, captures is nothing. Of course, that's just silly. You're going to play e captures on d4, and after bishop captures on c4, bishop to b4 with check, knight b to d2, and now knight to c6. This is one line where we will not be playing pawn to c5, as it's just not very good. We have castles, and now knight to f6, and this is why I think it's the most interesting, because white is sort of provoked into playing this e5 move, and by provoked I mean it's the top move recommended by the engine, so white will feel really good playing it. But after knight to d5 is just I mean, for someone who doesn't face the Queen's Gambit accepted a lot and gets this position, it's not easy to figure out how to play this. Knight to b3 is the absolute best, but you're still going to have a lot of problems capturing back the pawn. So what white will most usually do is go knight to e4, and then you're going to play knight to b6, attack the bishop, and after something like bishop to b5, let's say castles, white will capture on c6 to mess up your pawn structure, and after, let's say, bishop to g5, attacking your queen, queen to d5. And it's a really interesting position where white will finally say, all right, I've got nothing better, I'm going to capture back the pawn. Queen captures, let's say queen captures, knight captures, and only now do you strike with pawn to c5. Let's say knight to c6 and bishop to b7. You have this really funny position where, okay, if white captures, then you'll undouble your pawns, and if white goes for some sort of a tricky maneuver like knight to f6 with check, you're just going to play king to h8. You don't want to capture here, because if you capture, then knight to e7 with check, and you could run into some sort of a checkmate, or you go up the board and then you face all sorts of nasty ideas like e captures on f6 check, king goes to h8, pawn to a3, let's say bishop to a5, and now bishop to h6, and you will have to give up the rook. Knight captures, rook captures, and you will have this position, or you have to give up the other rook as well, where you have two rooks versus a knight and two bishops, where white is probably slightly better because of b4, as white usually is, but okay, not really slightly better. You will have two bishops and a knight versus two rooks and an extra pawn. So it's you know, it's a crazy position, but that's only if you actually capture the knight. If you play king to h8, then I believe black is the one that will be pushing. For example, white will capture on b4, c captures, knight to g4, as your knight is now really hanging, knight g4, you will play pawn to a5, and you will start your pawn storm on the king side. Let's say rook f will come to c1, you will play rook f to c8, and after something like pawn to f3, pawn to c5, pawn to c4, pawn to a4, the pawns are marching forward. So that is one way to play it, but just show you that there is nothing to worry about. So we've discussed e3, we've discussed pawn to e4, and now it is time for us to discuss knight to f3, as I imagine this is what you will be facing the most in your online and over-the-board endeavors in conquering pawn to d4 openings. So you're gonna play pawn to a6. This is what I recommend, as I find it is the most forcing line and the most natural to play. From top grandmaster play, Peter Svidler is the one that has used this against very strong players with good results. And the idea is that we want to play pawn to b5 as soon as possible, and just defend the pawn that white gambited. So let's say pawn to e3, going after the c4 pawn, pawn to b5, and the white always goes for this pawn to a4 move, as it is the absolute best. Bishop to b7, and now the only way for white to sort of look for advantage is pawn to b3. If white starts trading, let's say captures, rook captures, bishop captures, and then pawn to b3, the key idea to remember in these lines where you advance the pawn to b5 and you have a6 c4 is that you have to give this up. You cannot keep the extra pawn. There's no way to do it. You're just going to play e6 and continue development. B captures, bishop captures, and now knight to f6, and you just complete development. For example, castles kingside, bishop to e7, and after whatever white plays, you will castle to safety, and after, let's say, bishop to b2, knight b to d7, and after something like queen to c2, you will strike with pawn to c5. Or you can play h6 once, let's say, rook to c1 is played. Now you play pawn to c5. That is the key idea, as your c7 pawn is the only weakness in the position. Once you get rid of that, it's it's an equal game. I mean, both players with the bishop pair, both players with it's completely equal. So that's definitely the way to do it. So after bishop to b7, if white starts capturing, you don't worry about that. If pawn to b3, this is best for white. This is something that you have to know how to play, and you will play it again. You cannot keep the pawn. You have to give the pawn back. There's no way to keep the pawn. You just continue development. Knight to f6, and after b captures, and bishop captures, you play pawn to e6. So very similar. Castles, and now pawn to c5 right away. This is key. Only move 9, so not very, very difficult to remember, but c5 is the move that we really want to get in. So d captures is nothing, we just continue development. Knight b to d7, you're never in a rush to capture this pawn. Like knight b to d7, for example, bishop to b2, you're going to play bishop captures on c5, and after knight b to d2, you're going to castle, and you will enjoy your position. So after c5, probably knight b to d2 from white, and then you will play c captures on d4. White could maybe play something other than recapturing, like rook to b1. It's very interesting, but it was never played. So white could play it, but it was just never played. Knight captures on d4, and now after knight to c6, well, good thing to remember is that if something like rook to b1, the queen belongs on d7, on a light square, not on e7 or c7. So here, and then if bishop captures, you will also have pressure on this a4 pawn. So knight captures on c6, let's say bishop captures, and after queen to c2, trying to put pressure on that bishop, trying to maybe force black to fight off ghosts. It's important to remember that you do not have to react to this. Bishop to d6 can be played, and if bishop captures on e6, going after the bishop, you're just going to play queen to c7, and now you're the one threatening stuff. The h2 pawn is threatened, the bishop is threatened, and once the bishop moves, you will play pawn to g6, attack the bishop, and if bishop to b2, I'm showing you a really complicated line just to show you that black is perfectly fine in all of these skirmishes. Bishop captures on h2 check, and now after king to h1, even g captures on f5. White can never capture on f6 due to bishop captures on g2 check, and white loses the queen. So white has to react to this first, something like rook a to c1. Now the queen is nicely defended, and now you bring the rook here to help out with the defense of the bishop, and after something like knight to f3, you will play bishop captures on f3, and now after queen captures on c7, you will play bishop captures on c7, bishop captures on f6, bishop captures on g2 with check, king captures and rook to g8 with check, and even in a line as disgusting as this one, black still is up a pawn. So you haven't really kept the gambited pawn, but you're still up a pawn. Something like king to f3, you're going to play king to d7, and after rook to d1 check, you will play bishop to d6, and this is now the game continues. One thing you don't want to do is play king to e6, because then you actually run into this nasty checkmate where you only move with bishop to d6, and then you run into this weird structure where you're just checkmated on e6. So you don't want to do that. Sound like bishop to d6, and it's still perfectly fine. So those are the three most popular options after d captures on c4. Black will either play, most popular knight to f3, then pawn to e4, and then pawn to e3. And it's very similar how to play against all of them. And I'm now going to show you how Magnus played against a very similar structure. This is a game Magnus played it online. I don't know who the opponent is, as it didn't say, but it did say that he was rated around 2560. So a very strong player. So d5, c4, and Magnus accepted the queen's gambit. And after e3, Magnus played the immediate pawn to e5. And now after bishop captures on c4, he played knight to c6. And, if you play pawn to d5, then knight to a5 goes after the bishop, which is perfectly fine for black. Magnus's opponent played knight to f3, and then Magnus went into this very nice forcing line. Pawn to e4, knight f to d2, and now queen to g5, putting pressure on the g2 pawn, and his opponent actually played the best move. The best move is knight captures on e4, and now if you play pawn to g3, just stopping this, then after knight to f6, defending the e4 pawn, white's light squares are just terrible. You already developed the bishop. I mean, what are you going to do? Bring it back? It's a really bad position. So knight captures on e4, Magnus's opponent played the best move, queen captures on g2, knight to g3, as both the rook and the knight are hanging, so knight g3, and now knight to f6. Magnus just continued development, bishop to f1 kicks away the queen, queen to d5, and knight to c3. And here bishop to b4, just pinning the knight, bishop to d2. And here Magnus started playing some weird moves like bishop captures and c3, which is not the best. You have to play something like queen to d6, and then the game continues. Magnus won the game because he is Magnus, but it is not very good to capture the knight here. You want to put the queen on d6 and have a sort of a queen to d6 Scandinavian sort of a position where you can develop the bishop. It's even nicer because the bishop has already been developed. The queen is not blocking the bishop, but something like bishop to g2 can be played, then bishop to e6. For example, queen to c2, you're going to castle queenside, and after a3, you can even capture here. Captures, rook h d8, and you've finished development on move 11. So, I mean, life is really good here. So I'm not going to show you the entire game that Magnus played because, I mean, it was a blitz game and a lot of horsing around. Just the idea that Magnus had on how to play this position, because it's, I mean, this e4, knight f to d2, queen to g5, a very interesting idea that could easily happen in your own games. And now we've shown the 3 most played lines. We've showed how Magnus played this in one of his games online, where he was, probably just trolling and listening to the Sandstorm. He even said in that video that Sandstorm is quite possibly the greatest song ever released. And now we go into the Kramnik versus Kasparov from the 2001 Botvinnik Memorial Tournament. So let's go into it. Pawn to d4, pawn to d5, c4, and d captures on c4. Kasparov accepts the queen's gambit, knight to f3, because Kramnik goes for the most popular reply, and pawn to e6. We have pawn to e3 and pawn to a6. So Kasparov, again, with a system of his own, bishop captures on c4, and pawn to c5. Like in all of the other lines that we've discussed, c5 played as early as possible, except in that one line. We have castles by Kramnik, and now knight to f6. We have bishop to b3, knight to c6, and knight to c3. So this is a very well-known line. They're not playing anything new here, as this is a blitz tournament, so they're blitzing out moves, captures, bishop to e7, and after rook to e1, castles kingside by Kasparov. We have bishop to f4, a London type move, and now knight to a5 goes after the bishop. Pawn to d5, also a known move. Knight captures on b3, queen captures on b3, and knight captures on d5, and rook a to d1, pinning the knight, but Kasparov doesn't care. Kasparov just plays knight captures on f4 and gives up the queen for the knight and for the rook and a minor piece. Rook captures on d8, rook captures, and now rook to d1, offering a trade, and we have knight to d5, where again, it's not new. It has been played a year prior to this one. In the year 2000, Gelfand and Shirov played this exact same line, where Gelfand played knight captures on d5, and their game ended in a draw. But here, we have knight to e5 by Kramnik, and it was then on move 17 that they had a completely new game. So, okay, we have bishop to f6, and now knight to c4. We have rook to b8, preparing to strike with pawn to b5, knight to a5. We have bishop to d7 and knight to e4. Going after the bishop back to e7, nicely controlling the knight on e4, and knight back to c4. We have bishop to b5 and knight to e5, bishop back to e8, and now pawn to h3. We have pawn to b5 finally, and queen to g3. We have rook b to c8, grabbing hold of the open c file, and king to h1. And here Kramnik messed it up a little bit with this king to h1 move, but Kasparov missed to grab this knight to e3 idea. The trick is that if you capture on d8, then rook to c1 check, and you're just lost. King h2, knight to c1, knight to f1 nicely connects here, and after king to h1, you capture the queen with a discovery, and once king goes back, you again give a check, and once king g1, you will capture the rook, and you're just gonna be completely winning. You're up a piece, and that's it. So knight to e3, you cannot play rook captures on d8, so after rook moves, Kasparov would just play knight to f5. So it's basically a free remaneuvering of the knight, as the knight is much better here, and then you put the rooks on d5, for example, and c5, and you just have a great position. But okay, Kasparov played pawn to a5, we have pawn to h4, and now pawn to a4. We have knight to g5, putting more stuff in front of Kasparov's king. Kasparov played pawn to h6, we have knight g back to f3, and now knight to f6 by Kasparov. Rook captures on d8, We have rook captures on d8 and queen to f4, and now rook to d1 with check, king to h2, and now bishop to d6, and Kramnik is dead lost here. There's no way to get out of the pin. Kramnik tried pawn to g3, but Kasparov strikes with bishop to c6. And now look at this. If this knight moves, then it's just a rook to h1 checkmate. Even if player knight to g1 and block checkmate, then you have other issues. Bishop captures on e5. And you just resign. There's no way to play this. If queen captures knight to g4 with a beautiful fork here, and it's not even that it's not just the fork, but after knight captures on e5, you're also getting checkmated. The knight is covering g4. I mean, it's still just a matter of a couple of moves before you get checkmated. So Kramnik tried one last idea, pawn to g4, but now rook to d3 by Kasparov. Of course, the rook cannot be captured. I mean, you can capture it, but if knight captures, then bishop captures on f4 with check, and after knight captures, also the knight on f3 is hanging, so you cannot do it. So after rook d3, king to g1 was played. If pawn to g5, of course, just rook captures on f3. That's the idea. The queen cannot capture, knight cannot capture. So king to g1 is the last attempt, and now bishop captures on f3, and he was in this position on move 34 that Kramnik resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Whatever you play, you're getting checkmated. Also, the queen is getting lost. Nothing to even try here. If you try pawn to g5, it's again the same idea, just bishop captures on e5. Okay, the king is on a different square, but we're gonna force the king to the exact same square, and after king to h2, a nice knight to g4 check. King captures, and you even after you capture, even the bishop is defended, so you're getting checkmated really quickly. So yeah, that's the tutorial. One game by Magnus and one game by Kasparov, where he crushes Vladimir Kramnik. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope that you give the Queen's Gambit Accepted a chance. If you don't want to learn all of the other possible continuations, then just d captures and c4, and you make your opponent work for it. Because like I said, of course, it's not some sort of revelation, and you're not gonna crush everyone with it. But I think players who play d4 just know a lot more on how to play against the other openings. Plus, if pawn to d5. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a possibility. If your opponent, switches it up and goes into London, then I have also a tutorial on how to play against the London system. First link in the description below. And if you know those two, then you're good to go. So yeah, that's the tutorial. Hope you guys enjoyed it in a couple of games. I would like to thank Gautam Bhattacharya, Ren Sonkwa, Joseph Treat, Gurznichesfestival.org.gg, and Dr. Captain Collins for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.